Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about a major turning point in the Civil War, and that is the Battle of Antietam and the Emancipation Proclamation that Abraham Lincoln issues after the battle. Here are your goals. So to get started, guys, and to understand this part of the war, we need to first understand that at this point there was a risk of foreign intervention. The South hoped that Britain and France would want to join in the war against the North. Basically, they hoped for some outside help. Why did the South hope that this would happen? Why did they think this was possible? The main reason is that they thought that France and Britain depended on southern cotton. Most of the cotton that the South grew went to England and France, and in the factories there in Europe, they would turn this stuff into clothes and then sell it throughout the world. And that was the basis of much of the French and British economy. So the South thought that because France and England depended on southern cotton, that they would want to help the South to break away from the North and become an independent nation. On top of this, the South hoped that the European powers would want to join the war in order to weaken the North. They thought that maybe they would be interested in weakening the United States because then they could have more influence in the region. But so how did the South hope to win the European powers into the war? What did they have to do to get the South, or to get Europe to join? Basically, all they really had to do was win a few decisive victories. If they could show Britain and France that they knew what they were doing and that the fight against the United States was possible, then Britain and France, or maybe just one of them, would be pretty likely to join in the fight. And so, fortunately for the United States, this never happened. But what would have happened if Britain, let's say, joined the war? Well, it would have been really bad news for the United States because Britain had a big, powerful army and an even bigger and better navy. And this would have taken the war from something that the United States could handle to something that would have probably been totally unmanageable. And the North would have lost the war, the South would have formed its own new country, and slavery would have been institutionalized in the South for the long term. So with that in mind, let's now turn to look to the Battle of Antietam, which many historians see as one of the key turning points of the war. So in the summer of 1862, right after defeating McClellan in the failed Peninsular Campaign, Robert E. Lee decides that he's going to invade the North. And so why does he decide to do this? There are three main reasons that Lee decides to invade the North. He wants to march into Maryland and liberate Maryland, because remember, Maryland is a slave state. And so Robert E. Lee thought that by marching into Maryland with his army, the people of Maryland would rise up and join the Confederacy. 2, Lee was hoping to follow up his victory in the Peninsular Campaign with another crushing victory against the North. And he thought if he could just land one more crushing blow against the North, that Britain or France would then want to join the war. And that was the major hope. If he could win another big battle, then Lee was pretty sure that Britain or France, or both, would join the war, and the South would win its independence. So that's why he decides to invade. What happens, though? Well, so he begins marching north, and he meets the first Union army that he encounters at Bull Run, which is where there was an earlier battle. And so at this second battle of Bull Run, Lee is able to defeat the Union army handedly, and the Union army retreats back to the north. This opens the way for Lee to march north into Maryland, which he does, as you can see on the map there. And he marches up into Maryland, and he is disappointed to find that the people of Maryland do not actually want to rise up, and that they don't support the Confederacy, even though they're being invaded. And so he marches around in Maryland for a little while before getting met in the town of Antietam by a larger Union army. And there's a big battle here, and basically it's a really bloody battle, but neither side actually wins the fight. However, Lee's army is hurt badly after this battle, and it's forced to retreat back into Virginia afterwards. And so this is a very significant battle. Even though the battle itself was kind of a tie, it's viewed as a Northern victory because it forces Lee to march back south. He's forced to end his invasion of Maryland. As a result of this, Britain and France decide to stay out of the war. They think that the war is too close to call and that the United States maybe is too strong, and they don't want to get involved in the fight. And last of all, this war boosts Northern confidence. Before, after having lost a couple of major battles, the North feels like they can't win the war, or that at least that they can't beat the Confederates. But at the Battle of Antietam, the North is able to fight the rebel army successfully, and the North now feels like this is a war they can win. It is right after the victory at Antietam, quote-unquote victory, that Lincoln decides to announce the Emancipation Proclamation. And he announces it in 1862, and he writes it up and makes it official on January 1st, 1863. And this is one of the most famous documents in American history, and we need to look for a little bit and see what it says. So first of all, it declares that all slaves in rebel territory would be free forever. And so this is a big, sweeping claim, but it does have limits. And the major limit is that it does not liberate slaves in the loyal border states of Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware. And a lot of people criticized Abraham Lincoln for this, but looking back on it, historians see this as a pretty smart move. And so now let's look at why Lincoln writes the document in this way. The main reason that Lincoln said for the Emancipation Proclamation was to weaken the Confederacy. Lincoln thought that by declaring Southern slaves free, that he would encourage the slaves to run away or to rise up, and that this would help to weaken the Confederacy and limit their ability to fight, because they would have to worry about slaves, and they would lose the support of slaves working in the field. But it was limited in this very important way, and it didn't take slavery away from the loyal border states because he didn't want to upset those states. Remember, Lincoln said he needed Kentucky on his side, and so he left slavery in place in Kentucky, even though he thought it was wrong. And so now let's look at what the Emancipation Proclamation means, or what it meant for the war. First of all, it changed the nature of the war. The war was no longer a war to restore the old Union, but was rather now a war to destroy the old South and to replace it with new ideas. And it had the desired effect of increasing desertion of slaves from southern states, and it also allowed for the arming of free black men in the Union Army, which eventually led to hundreds of thousands of black soldiers fighting against the South. Now let's take a little bit of a closer look at exactly what role black soldiers played in the Union Army. So in the beginning of the war, in 1861, black soldiers were not allowed to fight in the Union Army. People in the North said that this was a white man's war, and there were a lot of racist notions in the North, even though they didn't have slavery. And one of the racist notions was that black people were not as brave as white people and therefore would not make good soldiers. But as time goes on, Northern opinions begin to change. And this happens for a couple of reasons. First of all, as the war goes on, thousands and thousands of former slaves escape or are liberated from the South and are ready and willing to fight against their former rulers. And it's hard in a war to deny eager soldiers the chance to fight. On top of this, the North needs more manpower. The South is putting up more of a fight than expected, and they need to enlist more men. So they begin looking to these ready and willing black men to take up arms. On top of this, abolitionists, most notably Frederick Douglass, claim that allowing black men to fight in the army will be the best way to prove that they are brave and equal to white men, and will allow them to earn their citizenship in the United States. And finally, a couple of experimental all-black regiments prove their valor and their bravery in the war. Most famously is the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, which was made up of all former slaves, who led the charge to take a southern fort in South Carolina and demonstrated to everybody the incredible bravery that black men were capable of. By the end of the war, 22 black soldiers had earned the Medal of Honor, which is the highest military award and which demonstrated definitively that black people were just as good at fighting in the army as white people were. And with this demonstrated, black soldiers go on to make up a major segment of the Northern Army. By the end of the war, 180,000 black soldiers were fighting for the North, and this made up about 10% of total Union forces. So this was a big deal, and Lincoln viewed it as a decisive factor in helping to win the war. Let's sum up a little bit. The Battle of Antietam and the Emancipation Proclamation helped to bring the war to a new stage. Before those two events, both sides hoped for a short war. The South had hoped to pull Britain and France in, and that would have ended the war in favor of the South. The North hoped that the South would surrender and rejoin the Union willingly, with slavery and everything still intact. After these two events happened, both sides lose hope of a short war. The South no longer hopes for foreign intervention. They don't think that Britain or France are going to help them. And the North now knows that the South is never going to agree to rejoin the Union because now the North has legally freed the Southern slaves. And so now they know it's going to be a fight to the death, a fight to the end, until the South is destroyed and something new can be put in its place. And so after Antietam and the Emancipation Proclamation, both sides begin to prepare for a long and grinding and brutal war that is to come. Here are your goals.